So, welcome to the show, Music Matters. Welcome back, everyone. Today on the show, we got Tim Mantle. Mantle, thank you very much for coming on the show, buddy. We really appreciate it, Tim. Brad, how's it going, buddy?
How's it going? I'm going to kickstart off with, so I've done, obviously, like I said before, I've done some research on you, and you're a bespoke sound designer. Am I correct when I say that?
Yeah, mostly just for synthesizers, though. That's basically what I work on, and yeah, I'm surrounded by them all the time, and that's my sort of thing. I just tweak with the synthesizers. Yeah.
How did you fall into that? Where did it all start?
Well, I didn't know what a synthesizer was until about 2004, which makes me sound young, but I'm not. I'm 38 now, I think. It's hard to keep up. But I had some friends that went to record an album in France, and I kind of felt I was missing out a little bit, stuck at home, and that's when I started to look at software stuff and writing music again with software. Like I had a background of composition just on pianos and stuff when I was younger and learning that way. And then I kind of just started to explore software and discovered soft synths, and it clicked with me because I was listening a lot to dance music in the 90s and really loved the sounds, but the idiot that I am, I never really questioned where those sounds came from. And so when I found these software synthesizers, it seemed to me that there must be the real hardware version of these software things, considering they were pumping out the same sounds that I'd heard for years and years and years. So I did a bit of research, and then I sort of just got heavily into synthesizers from that point. I started really geeking out with it. And a few years after that, I bought a Prophet 08 by Dave Smith Instruments.
Nice.
And I wasn't all that impressed with it because I had a JD800 Roland, and I thought it could do similar things. But the more time I spent with the Prophet 08, the more impressed I was with it. And over a course of a couple of months, I created a bunch of sounds myself using that synth, and then I just did a YouTube video, and people were. It was quite a popular YouTube video, and people were quite keen to have a copy of those sounds, and that's kind of how I fell into it.
Yeah, nice. So you are inspired by the 90s, and what was your sort of best era back then, or best sound, best DJ?
Well, it's complicated because I love all sorts of music, and when I talk about the synth sounds especially, I think even when I started doing this in 2004, or started looking about the synthesizer in 2004, it was the sounds of the band Orbital that were really connecting with me with the software stuff. So I hear those sounds in the software and go, right, I can associate that sound to my favorite band at the time, Orbital. So I take lots of inspiration from all sorts of different bands and genres, but if we're talking about the 90s, the stuff that came out of the 90s, Prodigy, Chemical Brothers, Orbital, those are the big three for me, and Daft Punk as well.
Quite massive on the 90s.
I saw Orbital live at Exeter University in it was 90 something. It was one of the most amazing sounds I've ever heard in my life. The sound system they had in the universities, it was just in the gymnasium. They used the gym hall, and they had the array set up in a circle almost above, hanging, and then Orbital were on a tower like they do, right? There's a scaffold tower right in the center. Yeah. And the sounds they were throwing around that room blew my mind. I stood right underneath the tower, almost as centered as I could get in the room, and you could just hear their noises going around that array. It was amazing. Yes, yeah. I've got quite a bit of their stuff on vinyl.
Oh well, we should compare notes on that. I've got a ton of Orbital on vinyl. I've got tell you my Discogs. I've got some really obscure stuff.
Nice.
There's a couple of we'll talk maybe later, but there's a couple of albums that I don't have, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
But I would say that if we're going to talk about gigs briefly, then the gig that really blew my mind was when Prodigy did the Land tour, and they came to Brighton, where I was living at the time, and that blew me away. I mean, I must have been too young to go, but I went anyway.
I think we all did.
Right.
I think their first track was Smack My Bitch Up, and like the place just went mad. It was insane. That's the first mosh pit I've ever been in. Like, it was terrifying but incredible at the same time. And they did one of their tracks off Jilted Generation, Full Throttle, and the bass in that was insane. You listen to that track now, turn up the bass on your hi-fi, you wouldn't even get close. I mean, that track is just, that'll never leave me.
Again, I was pretty blessed with the Prodigy too. So I'm maybe a little bit older than yourself, mate, by about 9 years. and so I used to go to the Eclipse in Coventry. And again, I've talked about this on other podcasts. The Eclipse in Coventry, I don't know if you really have ever heard of it, Tim, but it was a legendary club. It was the first rave club in England that stayed open all night long. And it was an old bingo hall.
Oh, you know what? I saw some photographs of some raves the other day. I will find you the name of the photographer at some point. But there's some old photographs from Coventry, all night rave club.
That would be the Eclipse. And you used to have to go to the record store across the road. It was called Bangin' Tunes. So you'd have to go over to Bangin' Tunes to get your ticket, and then you could get in there. And we saw Prodigy there when they first got signed. Literally, they just got signed, and they were doing their first PAs. So I very much enjoyed that their whole career, pretty much. And Jilted Generation, the artwork on that album, which I have as well, obviously, was pretty much based on one of the raves at Pitton, one of the old hippie raves that I went to, where they played. Yeah, but yes, like we're obviously part of that same little group. And
I'm 30 years old, so I caught the last of it.
Yeah, well, you caught some of it. That's enough.
That's right. Yes, as long as you got a little taste of it, it's all good, right? So, Psalm 37, P37 is the name of your company, and your brand and your sound design. How did you come about starting this, and when did it sort of start developing?
Well, as I say, it was really with that YouTube video I did for the Prophet 08, and felt like there was enough interest in what I'd done with that instrument that I could, expand on that. So instead of, I might have created 50 sounds at that time, which I then demoed on this video. I was only demoing the Prophet 08 as a synthesizer. I wasn't demoing my sounds, but I got good feedback from it. So then I spent a few weeks expanding on those sounds, and I wrote another 200 as you do, and then I just put them out there on the market. Kind of came up with a price which I thought was attractive for people to buy, and it did really, really, really well. And after that, you get, if your sounds are good, then you get good feedback, and that trickles down. And I think maybe a year or so after I got in touch with Dave Smith Instruments, just to let them know that I was out there and available, and forwarded some of the feedback that I'd had, because it's good, if people like your sounds enough, it will convince them to buy the synthesizer, not just your sounds, but they see a YouTube video of that synthesizer and they like what they hear, then they're going to go out and buy the synthesizer. So I kind of used that to talk to Dave Smith Instruments, and I didn't hear anything back for a while. And then when they were working on their Prophet 12, they dropped me an email and asked me if I wanted to work on that. So that's kind of how it fell in. It was a case of creating some really good sounds right out the bat that were good enough for the manufacturer to think, well, we could do with some of that on our next synth.
That's amazing. Dave Smith's pretty big name.
Yeah, Dave Smith is some good shit.
I was really chuffed to bits. to be working with them when that happened.
Yeah, man, that's cool. Like you say, you work with the Prophet 12, and from what I've read, you've done the Pro 2 and the Tempest.
Yeah. Well, I did I didn't work with them on the Tempest, but the Tempest was an instrument that I did a self-release on. So I've done lots of self-releases. The Tempest being one of them, which was a really popular release. But yeah, in terms of working directly with those Smith instruments, it was the Prophet 12 and the Pro 2 that we worked together on.
So did you, you obviously bought them instruments before, right? And then work with them? Nope.
Generally when working with a manufacturer, it's part of the development process. So the Dave Smith instruments, I was handed a couple of prototypes. I didn't keep those. They came, like the Prophet 12 came to the UK, and I was maybe one of 3 people that were going to use it. So it sort of, I got it, I worked with it for a little bit, and then I posted it onto the next guy. And the same deal with the Pro 2. So I was working on prototypes.
Interesting.
Nice, man. So what would be your favourite sort of Dave Smith instrument, if you could pick one out of just Dave Smith that you've worked with, or you'd like to get your hands on, sort of thing?
I'd like a Tempest again. I think the Tempest is the most underrated synthesizer out there, and people think about the Tempest as a drum machine, and people need to think about the Tempest as a synthesizer first, with drum machine capabilities. It has a 6-voice. It's got 6 voices, 2 analog oscillators, and 2 digital oscillators, which you can combine, all of those together into a 6-voice analog synthesizer. I love it.
Yeah, you can really manipulate that, can't you?
Yeah, the preset pack I did for that sells well because people don't necessarily understand how the Tempest works. It's a little bit convoluted in some ways, but once you get the hang of it, it's great. I love it.
What's the price mark on the Tempest?
In the UK, yeah.
For a used one, because to answer your question earlier, yes, I do buy synthesizers to work on. If I'm doing a self-release, I have to buy the synthesizer, presets, and then once the presets are done and I know that they're working on other people's gear, I move on and I sell that synthesizer to the next one. The Tempest, I wish I hadn't sold, but I had to. The Tempest I bought for £850, and at the moment I saw one today, I think at £1,500.
Yeah,
and they just, but that's not a regular price. I don't think anybody really knows how much a Tempest is worth.
Yeah,
it's sort of like, if I was to say what, I don't think you should pay more than £1,000 for a Tempest.
Yeah.
What was the instrument you was? I see you highlight on Instagram that someone was charging like $6,000 for some synth. What was that? I can't remember, wasn't it?
I've got a feeling. Oh right, so there's okay, so there was a couple of things on Reverb, and it does annoy me, but people try and get away with what they could get away with. So Korg released a reissue of the ARP 2600, and their price was £3,000, but it was a limited edition. I can't remember how many they had available, but people have clearly just bought that synthesizer to then sell on the used market and mark it up like insane prices. But that's just an example of trying to resell something that's limited edition. But Reverb, I don't know what people are on when they list stuff on Reverb. So there was another one where the Roland Jx-8p, which is kind of like this Super JX behind me, but half of one of these. And they listed this was the best one. They listed a Roland Jx-8p for close to £3,000, and it's worth, I'd say, maybe £700. But they said it was new. They said it was new old stock.
Right.
And then the disclaimer at the bottom was, well, it's been hanging around for a while, so it's got all these scratches and stuff on it. And you look at the photos, and it's pretty beat up for something that's being claimed as new old stock.
So it's like a synthesizer. It's like a synthesizer catfish.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, a lot of that going on at the moment.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
When you did get approached by Dave Smith, or you guys started working together, how long does a process like that take? Right, when you actually start to develop a sound with them for one of their bits of hardware, like how long can that take?
I will say that I know how much time I would like to take on it. Some manufacturers give you that time and others don't. So I'm going to tell you how much time I would like to take. And that is per sound would take maybe anywhere between 10 minutes and half an hour. I'll come up with the first render of a sound, and what I'll do, I'll keep creating sounds, probably more than the person wants. So let's say a manufacturer says, "Can you do us 50 sounds?" I'll end up doing 120, and then I'll come back and I'll review them, and then I'll find the ones that I like, and then I'll re-render them. And so what I would say is that maybe each sound, if I'm given the time that I want to spend on it, might take an hour to make it sound correct to my ears, to add all the modulation that the manufacturer has requested, to name the sound, to maybe add a sequence if the manufacturer's requested that. You know, there's lots of synthesizers have lots of different capabilities that the manufacturers want to show off, and they say, okay, each sound you have to do this, that, and the other. So I would like at least an hour per sound, but you know, it depends how much time I'm given with the synth as to how confident I am that they will like the sounds, or rather, like, the quality of the sounds honestly depends on how much time they give me to do it.
Yeah.
Is this like, if you don't mind me asking, is this like your full-time job?
Absolutely not. And so I do work part-time elsewhere to pay a mortgage and all the other things that come with adult life. But I've been trying to make this my side. You know, it's been my side hustle for 10 years, and it's gone really well up until recently, where there's just too many people releasing preset packs. When I started, there was me and maybe two others that were doing this sort of work, like sort of doing preset packs as self-releases. And there was a couple of people when, you know, we spoke with each other. It was quite a small group, and we were all nice to each other. And within the last, I'd say, within the last couple of years, it's been hard for the customer to see the wood from the trees. So much stuff coming out at the moment, and it's making my life difficult. And it's making me wonder whether I should continue to do preset design. So I worked on a Dave Smith it is a Dave Smith OB6 recently, and I spent months on that project, being a self-release, and I know that the time I invested in it now is not going to pay me back by the way the market is at the moment. So it's not my main job, and I'm wondering whether there's other things I should be pursuing beyond preset design at the moment.
Interesting.
I'd like it to involve synthesizers as much as possible, because that's really what I'm into it for.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And you did partner with Korg as well, right, to develop some of their sounds for the Minilogue?
So the Minilogue was that's a slightly different one. So they wanted me and another guy in the UK to do a sort of a complementary pack of presets for the Minilogue. So the Minilogue had been released, and then they wanted to kind of create additional buzz and interest in the Minilogue like a couple of months after release, I suppose. And, I worked on that with another guy called JD-73. I think I was working with Dan on that one, who's another preset designer. He also services Fender Rhodes pianos. That's his.
Really?
That's his full-time thing. I think. Yeah, he's a good guy. I met him at SYNTH Fest last year. Anyway, so yeah, I worked on the Minilogue with Korg, and then they were pleased enough with that I then worked on the iMono poly, so like the software, the mono poly, and that went well. And then we went on and worked together on the Prologue.
See, because I use Reason, and I've got the mono and the poly Korg plugin. Is that what you were involved in?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so I'm speaking to the man behind that.
Yeah. So I'm not the only person that was writing sounds for it, of course, but
sure, yeah.
Yeah, it's the iMono poly which is the VST from Korg, and yeah.
Very nice, man.
Yeah, and you also teamed up with Novation too, right, for the bass station?
Yeah, most recently. So the Summit. So I think again they wanted me to. So it was the Peak first. So they sent me a Peak because they wanted to release some additional sounds for Novation Peak, and again they were pleased enough with that to get me on board with their flagship synthesizer, the Summit, which I cannot speak highly of. They sent me one of those. I've kept it. I love it. But that was a really good example where I was given a ton of time to do the work right, and by the time I sent back the sounds, I was really happy with them in both the Peak project and the Summit project.
Nice,
man.
I actually have one of the bass stations. I got the bass station too.
That's a sick. So what I'll do I'll send you over my bass station 2 presets. So
awesome.
I really rate that synthesizer.
It's a great little toy.
It's cool, man. And
for the money, bang for buck for what you get. Like I think, I don't know what it is in the UK, but I think I paid $700 Canadian for it. So that's probably like, I don't know, £300-400 maybe over there in the UK.
You could probably pick one up for $250. And there's a reason that Orbital take it on tour with them. I think they still have it in their rig at the moment.
Yeah,
really.
It sounds great. And the work I did for the bass station 2 was some of the best work I felt I've done. But the problem is that when you release presets for a mono synth, people just don't really buy it because it's a bass monophonic synthesizer. It does like a couple of different things.
Yes, it's pretty basic, right?
People use it for bass or they use it for lead. So if I come out with 128 variations, I just don't think people are really interested in it. So I stopped writing for mono synths after the bass station 2. It's a great piece of kit. I love it.
Yeah, I love the noises. It's fun.
Yeah.
I don't really know how to use it properly, but I like it.
But it's cool sound. I was gonna, what brand would you say has been the most enjoyable to work for, making these presets and doing other sorts of sound design?
I'm not gonna say one's better than the other. They all have their
distinctive sort of way.
Yeah, the distinctive sort of way of working. Some are more relaxed, and that's great. And some have been a bit uptight and precious. What I would say is that the ones that the difficulty comes when a synthesizer isn't ready. So I have received a synthesizer, which I won't name, that like the firmware just wasn't ready to be writing presets for. And then when I wrote a bunch of them, I got new firmware, installed the firmware, and all those presets suddenly were out of whack, and I had to do the work again. So it's really, I think it's the smaller teams are best to work with, because you get that sort of direct communication that's got a lot of confidence and a little one-to-one. And on the other side of it, with some of the bigger companies, that they're getting a little bit lost in higher management and the pressures that come with trying to release a new synthesizer. You can kind of that sort of filter through on.
Yeah. I suppose we won't mention obviously brands, but I assume that some of the smaller companies, like you say, have got more time to speak to you on a personal level to get the best sound for that product, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that, all brands are getting the right people on board to write presets. But I mean, I don't know whether I should go down that rabbit hole.
No, that's cool.
Yeah, no, maybe not. Yeah. So personally then, if you were going to look at your collection and what you've used over the years synth-wise, is there any that really stands out for you that's one of your favorite synths, or that you would never give up, like your Desert Island synthesizer?
Well, I was hoping you'd ask this question. I've got my Desert Island synthesizer, even though I don't own it, is the Rev 2, which is it's a newer model of the Prophet 08.
Yeah.
Now, it's not to everybody's taste. I think a lot of people don't get along with the filter on that instrument. But when you weigh the pros and cons of all synthesizers that have ever been made, the Rev 2 has a lot going for it. It's got so much modulation. It's got effects on board. It does have a good sound to it. Might not be the best to everyone's taste, as I say, but it's good enough. And if I was to be on a desert island with a synthesizer, I think I'd want the Rev 2, because it just covers so much.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
But I haven't played all synthesizers, so there's a couple that are still on my list to play.
Yeah.
Not many, but a couple that I want to play.
Yeah, have a little try on.
What ones would they be?
The Jupiter 8 I haven't managed to get a hold of yet, and Matrix 12 I haven't managed to get a hold of, and also an Oberheim 4 voice. And lastly, I've never actually tried a Prophet 5, and I don't know how that's escaped me through the last. I've only been going for about 10 years now, but it's still, I should have seen a Prophet 5 at some point by now.
So we've spoke about this before with the synths, and the 80s was great for obviously that sort of time, right? And I like the Pro 1 that Steve Clark uses. Like that guy, he went in Yazoo.
Yeah.
When he used the Pro 1 in there, and Behringer made a Pro 1 now, like obviously the copy. But I don't know whether it sounds the same, but that original Pro 1 sounds awesome.
Again, the Pro 1 I've seen in the flesh, but I've never actually used it. And you're talking about Vince Clark there from
Vince Clark, sorry, yes, not Steve Clark, Vince Clark, sorry, yeah.
From Depeche Mode and
yeah.
Yazoo, and now I can talk about Erasure and how great Erasure are.
Oh, absolutely.
At least it sounds, I think that it's a bit too poppy for some people. But
but still, it's that whole sound, right?
To how it's programmed and sequenced, and then the vocals on top of that, and how that is married together. It's like Erasure. It's a little bit too much for some people, but I think the way it was put together is brilliant. And the Pro 1, again, I haven't managed to get hold of that one, but I hear good things about it, and it would be nice to get hold of that. The 80s still, unfortunately, are the best.
Yes.
Yeah, my parents say that the 80s were the best.
I was blessed. I was born in 73, so I really was an 80s kid. Like, I grew up in the 80s, and it was fantastic. At the time, we didn't realize how fantastic it was, but it was a pretty good decade for sure.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there are some really powerful synths that came out of the 70s, of course.
Oh, for sure.
But I think the 80s was really the heyday.
Yeah, and it was when they were utilized to their full potential. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think in the 70s they were there and people were playing with them, but in the 80s people embraced synthesizers and really like utilized them.
It was electronic music that really took off
Yes,
towards the late
right.
70s and into the 80s, and obviously just up until now. So
yeah,
it really gained ground in the 80s.
100%. So sorry, Brad. Sorry, mate. Didn't cut you off there. It seems we're talking about the instruments and the hardware side. For your preset packs that you've put out for your various instruments, which one do you think you've had the most recognition, or like has been your most popular presets, and which instrument was that for?
I think the most popular was for the Tempest. The one that I probably received the most recognition for was probably the Prophet 08, because I just got a lot of good feedback on Dave Smith forums for that one. But I think with the Tempest, that was the most popular. Definitely.
Nice.
Still going today.
What's the process from start to finish on when you start doing it? How you record it? How you do the design part to the final product? How does that work?
It's when I first started out, I just would boss out sounds and never go back to them. So, for example, the Prophet 08, I would have just bossed out 200 sounds and then made them available to purchase, and didn't really think much more of it from that point onwards. But the more that I've worked with manufacturers, the more I've kind of become a bit of a perfectionist. So for the last project, when I worked on the OB6 as a self-release, I spent way too much time, much more time than I should have done. But the process basically starts out as the first thing I'll do is clear all the sounds on the synthesizer, so they just have that basic waveform, a sawtooth waveform, and I'll save that 200 times. So now I've got absolutely no direction from any other stuff or on that synthesizer before. So I've got 200 blank canvases to start off with. And then I'll just, it depends on the synthesizer where on the synth I'll start. But sometimes I'll think to myself, well, I haven't done any bass sounds, so maybe I'll do a bass sound. I might think, I haven't done any monophonic lead sounds, so maybe I'll do something like that. But generally, I'll just start tweaking the oscillators and the waveform, and it will guide me in a certain direction until I have an idea of where it then needs to go. So I'm kind of like, just tweak until the synth sort of gives me an idea, and then I'll go on and finish that idea. And then, as I say, I'll probably do that 200 times, and then I'll come back, listen to them, and maybe delete some, and then rework others as I go along. And then name them if I have to. I'd rather not, because it's a pain to come up with names, because names are subjective to you, to me, the creator, right? I might name a preset something completely different to how it sounds, but it means something to me, whereas other people go, are you sure like all these names are linked up to the right presets properly? Has there been a jump? Because it doesn't seem to make sense. No, it just makes sense to me.
Yeah.
And then I will just send the word out that I've got something coming out to wherever that needs to be, Instagram most recently, and forums and stuff, and then I sort of brand it a little bit. But as I say, it's I spend way too much time on it these days. I'm not really getting back what I put into the last few releases.
But you really enjoy it, obviously.
You're right, I do. And I'm in an iron as to whether I should keep going, but to be honest, it's something that I do enjoy, the process of creating presets for synthesizers. That's just, it's the creativity thing that I can't really drop. It's just, is it worth my time putting all my hours into something like that? Maybe I should be looking at a different angle, as to maybe not making money out of it and just enjoying it and seeing what comes out of it at the end of the day. But I am still trying to make a living.
I think it's pretty much a struggle that artists have in general, right? Doing something that you love to do, but than doing it to make money, right? It sort of changes things a little bit, right?
It does. It becomes work.
Yeah,
I think a lot of musicians are pretty.
I think art in general, right? You know, any kind of creativity. I think people have that same battle. So, Tim, did you have any like training, schooling for this sound thing, or are you pretty much self-taught guy?
All the synth stuff is completely self-taught. So,
right on.
I studied music at school, and my parents put me into, I can't remember. They gave me an ultimatum once. I can't remember. It was either after school, something or other, or learn to play the piano. So I said, all right, I'll learn to play the piano. And I didn't get very far. I was grade 2, but I used to compose on the piano all the time. My parents always said I had a good ear. So I could hear a piece of music and I could replicate it on the piano pretty quickly. But the problem with learning to play piano is they teach you with classical music, and I'm not interested in that. I'd rather learn to play jazz, and that's what I really wanted to do. Teach me how to play piano with something I'm interested in, like jazz music. And that would have been cool, but. So sorry, I've completely forgot the question.
The question was schooling and training.
Yeah.
So I had a background in composition, basically, and playing keyboards.
Yeah.
And how I learned was in 2005 I bought a Roland Jx-8p, and that taught me a lot more than I knew before I bought a 101. And I would say the 101 is probably the best monophonic synthesizer of all time, and people would murder me for saying that, because there's the Minilogue, but the 101 to me is a fantastic design. The way it's laid out, it's just ergonomically brilliant, and of course it sounds great, but it's the way it was designed that helped me to understand envelopes and LFOs and filters and all these different things. It taught me how to really create. It taught me the fundamentals of synthesizers. I'd been mucking about with soft synths for ages, but I wasn't getting particularly far. But when I picked up the 101, that's how I learned. And then from that point onwards, that could just be transferred to every other synthesizer that I bought and sold.
When was the beginning release for the 101? Because they've Roland brought out their boutique version, right, of that synth. So how? Sorry, go on. Sorry.
I think the 101 came out in '82. And then the boutique version came out a couple of years ago, which I've tried, and I didn't. I like the fact that it's got polyphony on the boutique version, but it's not the same experience as having everything in full size right there. And the original 101 is just so light as well. I'm not saying the boutique one isn't, but I've got a lot of positive things to say about 101 and how it was designed.
Do you still have your original?
No, I went through a bad patch a few years ago, and I had to sell my 101. I bought it for 250 quid in 2005, and I sold it for 670.
There you go.
True London hustler.
Yeah, exactly. I can't complain. I've got a System 100 101, which is a slightly earlier model of Roland monophonic synthesizer, which only has one oscillator, but I think you can bring in can't remember whether I think it's adjustable waveforms, but it's bigger. It's got a bigger sound than the 101.
Yeah.
So I bought it specifically because I didn't have true monophonic synthesizer that sounded badass. So I was like, I need to get, so like for you it might be the Pro 1, but this is the Roland that I had to get hold of.
For sure. I mean, I make techno music, so I mean, this is going to be my next question. Like, obviously, I see you play with Eurorack, and I noticed that you was actually trying to design your own module as well, or you make your own one. Is that right?
Yeah. How did you? Where did you? Oh, yeah. Okay.
I'll do my research.
I know which one you're talking about. Okay, so basically, when I started with Eurorack, I thought I know absolutely nothing about electronics really, so I wanted to see if I could figure out how to make a 3-voice VCO module based on the Curtis chip, and I failed miserably. I mean, I think there's just a small issue with the design that I did that somebody would, I reckon, take one look at and solve in an instant. But there's also something else. I was working with somebody else to do a multi-band stereo EQ, which isn't exactly out on the Eurorack market at the moment, but I think that ship has sailed, and I'm using something else, this ER301 as a stereo EQ at the moment, so it's good.
Do you have much of a Eurorack setup, or?
Yeah, it's terrifying, and I get absolutely
terrifying.
Terrifying because I've spent like so much money, all this Eurorack stuff. Each module is just silly.
It's so expensive, eh? It's crazy.
The reason for it is that most of the time they're small companies, and they don't know how many of this unit they're going to make and how profitable it will be. So the cost of these modules is basically because you're not buying it off Behringer or Korg. So when Behringer come out with these modules, of course they're way cheaper than everybody else because their margins are so much.
For sure.
But anyway, yeah. So I've got well, I'll show you this little version I've got. Not that your listeners will be able to see this, but I decided that like I had this a massive case behind me, and I needed to kind of shrink it a little bit so that I could concentrate on specific modules and learn a little bit more about them. So the ER301 is just this incredible toolbox of things that you can do. So I put that in this smaller rack to kind of learn how it works. But yeah, I've got a lot of it, and it's absolutely shameful the amount of time I've used it.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I don't know what happened there.
Well, we might be streaming upstairs. Trying to figure it out, but yeah.
That's fair enough. Brad can edit. Brad does a little edit after the fact. Anyway.
Yeah, adjust the levels in that.
He can edit that.
It's all good, man.
We'll see how we go.
Yeah.
So
yes, I was going to say, seeing as we were talking about, modules and companies and whatever, and Behringer's come up a couple of times so far. Yeah. What are your thoughts on Behringer at the moment? Because they are pumping out a lot of sort of stuff that's affordable, but does it sound as good to you? Like, what's your actual thoughts on it?
I thought the Model D sounded wicked, sounded great, but ergonomically, I was talking to somebody in the studio about this recently because I had a lot of chats with producers and studio techs recently to try and find where else I can go, and I was discussing the Behringer Model D and how good it sounds, but it's like a toy.
It feels cheap. Yeah, it feels cheap. They do. Their knobs aren't good. It's like everything feels a little bit loosey and goosier, but the sounds are pretty good. Brad, I've got the
TD3, but again, as you say, you've had many discussions with people in studios. We've had many discussions with people because people ask us as well, like, what's your take on Behringer's range now with the modules coming out as well for Eurorack? I mean, I was looking to buy the Model D. I have the D fam because I'm touching into Eurorack now, but from what I've seen of the Model D, and like you just said, it does sound, it isn't bad. I mean, for the price as well.
No, it's really good. It's really good. The Model D is probably,
you know, that blew me away when I first listened to it. It sounds great, but I couldn't get on with the. So in fact, it was maybe like the second or third module that I bought because I just wanted something to get me going in the Eurorack business, and it just didn't click with me because it was too cramped. Everything's just too cramped, and I couldn't. Again, like a big part of a good synthesizer design for me is the ergonomics of it, and I would have liked the Model D to be a bit bigger. And I know they've got the Poly D out now. I don't know. I've not had the opportunity to try that, but I think that might be a little bit more enjoyable to program. I would imagine.
Mm-hmm.
But if you ask me what I think about the process of reissuing instruments and the way Behringer have gone about it, that's a whole different story. But the sound I think that they're coming out with is pretty good.
Yeah. So I know a few people are a bit unhappy-ish with Behringer, the way they've gone about their process. But I think for some consumers that don't have the budget, you can go and get some toys for quite cheap that sound pretty good, right?
I hear that, but you can also come up with your own ideas and make them still sound good.
100%. Yes.
That's where I sit on the fence with it. I mean, they are making these reissues affordable and available for people who wouldn't otherwise be able to access them, and I totally get that, and I have no problem with people that buy them, obviously. But I just feel like if you're a company, come on, like
do your own creative. Yes, do your own stuff. Let's come something new. Yeah.
I mean, I got the Moog D-Fam, and that I think Moog, it feels like the dials feel awesome.
Yeah, you can feel the difference between the Moog and anything Behringer's ever made, obviously.
Yeah.
There's no comparison.
I even played with is it the Grandmother?
Yes.
Yeah, I played with that in the store. That even feels fucking
I was
awesome.
toyed when I bought my bass station. I was actually playing with the Grandmother, and I was like, well, okay, that's $1,200, but it's amazing.
Yeah.
I spent 2 days. I literally stood in our music store, our local music store, for probably 2 hours one day, and then about an hour and a half the next day. And I just literally stood there just playing with that machine, and it's amazing. But for me, I'm not a producer. I'm not, I'm just a guy playing around in his kitchen. So the bass station for like half the price sounded, not the same. Right,
but I think you made the right choice, and I think that if I'm right, the Bass Station 2 has chorus available as an effect on it. I could be making that up.
No, I think you're right. I think it does,
and chorus does incredible things.
Yeah,
it's my favorite effect. The synthesizers.
What's the other? You got the Grandmother. What's the bigger one than that?
It's the Matriarch.
Matriarch. Yeah, that's worth some bob.
That's been on my shopping list, but I haven't pulled the trigger on that because I told myself, all the Eurorack stuff I put together because I had a couple of theories about what you could do with Eurorack, and they all came true once I managed to buy everything. But I also wanted a 4-voice synthesizer, so I built a 4-voice synthesizer out of Eurorack that could do all sorts of different things. And so I don't have an excuse to buy a Matriarch as much as I'd like one.
So with Eurorack then, with the modules that you buying these certain modules for a certain sound you're trying to get? Because that's basically what Eurorack is about, right?
So you can do, and this is the thing, like when I first started looking at Eurorack, it really was just sort of you build a synthesizer out of Eurorack. So you have your oscillators and your filters and your envelopes. And the more, I think, even more recently, it's been about getting a bit wild and wacky with what you can do with Eurorack. But I was a little bit put off with Eurorack to begin with because of the, dare I say it, the hipsters that were using it at the time. So Eurorack started a little bit more underground than that and a little bit more professional than that. And then suddenly, especially in the London area, there was a bit of a hipster thing to be into Eurorack, and it put me off for a little bit because of the interactions I had with some people in the shops and this and that. And eventually I knew what I wanted to get out of Eurorack, and that was, first of all, as I say, a 4-voice synthesizer, and also a real-time audio resampler, which I've managed to make actually work, which is weird. But in answer to your question, what I would say is that Eurorack solves so many different problems that people may have but don't know how to solve right now. There's a module for everything. Like what they used to say with the iPhone, there's an app for that. There's a module for that, right? So you could build a whole Eurorack system which is just tools to integrate into whatever gear you already have. And that's what I find really exciting about it, is it bridges the gap between the vintage and the modern. You know, you can get it all combined and get it all working together in really interesting ways with Eurorack.
Yeah. What's the go-to shop then for synthesizers in London? Because I know you obviously I used to buy some gear from West End DJ, Tottenham Court Road and stuff like that. They didn't have much of a selection there, obviously mainly DJ stuff. But where would you go for your equipment and to try stuff?
Where I was going for, I mean, a couple of them closed down over the last 10 years, but the place I would go to is One Joe Keys down on Denmark Street. Unfortunately, their shop keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller, but the people that work there are great. I get on with them really well, and you go down there, and you go down there because you hope they might have a synth that you might want to be buying and you want to try out, but you end up staying there for an hour or so just chatting to them about synths and what's coming out and what's hot and what people like. I mean, that's what shops should be. It should be really welcoming and warm, and you know, if you walk into a shop and you don't really know what you're doing, you know, you shouldn't expect the person behind the counter to be pretentious about what they're doing and what they're selling. I mean, that's just the worst way to go about it. And One Joe Keys are the complete opposite. They really like help you out as much as they possibly can, and they get the gear in as well. You know, they're not afraid to drop 10 grand on a Moog one, even though they're this tiny little shop, you know. So kudos to them, and those sort of places are dying out. But central London, you've got to find One Joe Keys. Yeah,
that's just like the records shops, isn't it? Really, like you go in there. Like I used to go to Phonica Studio, Phonica Records, and you sit in there and you just chill out and pick out your vinyl. And they're like, "Do you need a hand?" And it's a cool vibe. You're not in a rush to buy it. They're not rushing you out the door to buy it. You just sit there and chill out and take as much time as you want.
Yeah.
What I would say in terms of Eurorack is we don't. There are maybe one or two places to walk in the shop in London and buy Eurorack, but they're not places that I particularly enjoy going to. And I went over to. I've been over to LA a couple of times in the last couple of years, and there's this amazing store in Santa Monica called Analog Haven, and you just walk in there, and again, those guys, they don't care about how much you know about Eurorack. They're just like totally into the gear, and they want to share that with you. And it's just a really nice experience to just like bond with people that you've never met before over, you know, just geeking out over gear. But you know, you come to London and the experience is just not like that at all. It's a real shame.
Our last guest was like that, wasn't he? Noir at Blanc V. He's from LA, and he said there's stores there that you can go in and just lose yourself there for a long time.
Yeah, Perfect Circuit Audio is another one up in Burbank.
Yeah, that's one he mentioned,
I think he mentioned that one, didn't he?
Yeah. I mean, they've got everything up there, and they let you get on with it as well. Yeah. You just walk in, and you're just there for as long as you want, and they make good deals up there.
Yeah. So, do you have any future projects coming up, Tim? Like, you got anything in the pipeline that you might be working on, or?
This is the question. If I'm honest, how do I want to keep?
If you want to keep doing it,
yeah. Because I would say to anybody that's thinking of doing it, you know, if you're gonna get enjoyment out of it, and you're not going to take it too seriously, sure, give it a try. But in terms of making money at the moment, it's not particularly viable. So I have been having a lot of meetings with producers and and engineers to float various ideas about synthesizers and the Eurorack systems that I have going. But COVID really took really blew that.
Yeah, I've done a lot of things.
Yeah, of course, and but in my case, it was it was just drumming up meetings and interest, and that was picking up pace, and now it's just a little bit off. So if I was going to do any, I was thinking about the Korg Wave 8, doing a self-release there. The other thing is that I haven't spoken to manufacturers in a very long time. I haven't reached out to anyone in a very long time. There's a Eurorack company, Tip Top Audio, that I've spoken to a few times over the last couple of years, and I haven't been as proactive with our conversations as perhaps I should have been. So I might catch up with those guys, see how they're doing. But in terms of the self-release, the Korg Wave State interests me enough that I would get something out of the synthesizer, even if it wasn't a profitable thing to do.
Yeah. What about tracks? Do you produce any tracks yourself? You ever thought about releasing anything?
So going back to how I found synthesizers in the first place in 2004, when my friends went out to France to record an album. That's exactly what I was doing. I was writing music at home, and I was doing, so I started that in 2004, and I was doing that up until like 2015, and then I just ran out of time. And it's not because, I mean, it's again, I became a bit of a perfectionist, and I wasn't sure what direction my stuff was going in. The best stuff that I did was stuff I was, had a whole sort of synth soundtrack with drums, and I sang over the top of it, and that stuff I'm really proud of. And then after that, I was doing a lot of sort of weird. I was getting really interested in vaporwave and vapor funk sort of records, which is sort of a little bit like lo-fi. I'll get murdered for this as well, but it's sort of like elevator music slowed down a bit, and then you might put some classic vocal sample over the top of it, slow that down as well, and then call that your track. But if you do it right, it will sound really good. If you produce it right, it's punchy, and you might take a sample of a bass line, but then redo it with your own bass synthesizer. So it's sort of like re-engineering old tracks and breathing new life to them and adding a new beat to it. And I was really interested in that for a while, and I came up with some stuff that I liked. It is available on SoundCloud under the guise of Tim Please.
Tim Please?
Tim Please, yeah.
Awesome. I will. I'll check it out.
Yeah, we'll check that out for sure.
I enjoyed it, but I just, again, no time right now. No time.
Yeah. What's if you could sum it all up quite quickly for us? What is how big is your collection of synths and everything now? Like how many pieces do you have?
Right. If we ignore the Eurorack stuff, then I've got this. This Super JX that I bought last week because it was an insane price, and I've had an hour and a half with it, and now it's hiding behind the door. I've got the Prophet 08. I bought a Roland Jupiter 6 a month ago, and again I had like 2 days with that and bought a flight case and hid it. Does need a service though, so that's what I keep telling myself. Novation Summit, which I really recommend. I've still got a Korg Prologue. I've got the System 100M, which is the monophonic synthesizer I mentioned earlier. And unbelievably, how could I forget, I managed to buy a Yamaha DX1 last year, and that I'm still pinching myself about that. If you don't want to know what a DX1 is, Google it.
I see you got the cartridge pack. You ordered it from the States. So looked at your Instagram. You got the. What was that for?
Yeah. So that was for the DX1. So the DX1, Yamaha only made 140 DX1s. At least that's the myth. I think it's a stupid myth. But anyway, I think they made less. There's no. I get really annoyed about this whole 140 Yamaha DX1 things because there's no literature that says that. It's just this myth that's been handed down over the generation. Anyway, so the DX1 is a really, really rare instrument, and so finding parts for it is just as hard. The DX1 is with the tech now, and the cards that you saw slot into the top of the instrument, and they have presets on them effectively. So a DX1 is basically, to put it in a basic form, is basically two DX7s with much better DA converters inside of it, a weighted keyboard, an amazing interface that taught me more about FM synthesis than I had a DX7 for months and couldn't figure, like many people, couldn't quite get deep into it. But the DX1 just, half an hour with that solved that.
Yeah, I mean, could you wipe that and then reload presets back onto that chip or card, what you're going to call it?
Not on that one. I don't think I've got the other version here, but there's RAM and ROM. So the one you saw on my Instagram was ROM, or I can't remember which way round it is, random access memory. And so one of the cards has presets that you can't alter, and then you can insert a card into the DX1 where you can save presets and or performances. So performance is like the way the keyboard and instrument behaves to you playing it, but the preset is obviously the sound. You see what I mean?
Have you, I've been meaning to ask this question, have you worked with anyone famous in the music industry from doing this? Have you worked with or helped show or with what you do to anyone famous or in a band or as a producer or anything like that?
Well, as I say, with some of the meetings I've had recently have been really interesting, and they've been with some big guys who I'll leave nameless, but again, they're sort of a lot of the time they're producers that are unsung, and they've worked on these incredible hits that and yet you never really heard about them. I mean, on some of the preset stuff that I've worked alongside with other people that were doing presets for the same synthesizer at the time. I didn't work directly with them, but I was working on the same project with them, and I was really blessed to be doing that. People like Jamie Liddell and Richard Devine. So that's always nice to know that you're in the back of the Prophet 12 manual with these great names, and you're slap bang in the middle, surrounded by these much bigger names. But in terms of, I've basically been working at home all this time. Yeah. That's the thing. So the work that I do is just preset stuff that I've been sat at home doing, and that's basically what I was trying to move forward from before COVID-19 happened. I was really working hard and moving what I'm doing indoors here out into the real world, into the studio, where we can start to create new sounds for new tracks that are happening out there at the moment, because there's lots of different genres that play it safe with that classic sound that those songs have. So particularly like grime that's happening in London at the moment, and the hip-hop direction that they're trying to go for. It's very samey. Nothing wrong with that. It's just what people, if you've got those little hi-hats in the top, the people that are listening to those tracks can identify with those and say, yeah, that's the kind of music that I'm into. So it's like a formula, but what I would like to do is to be able to bring something new to that, where, yeah, okay, you can still use these little elements of that genre, but let's like hit them with this insane bass line they weren't expecting, because that'll make people just go mental if you start throwing things in that they weren't expecting but sound really, really hot. So that's basically where I want to be with it, and start collaborating with these artists. And I think there's definitely a way into it, but it's on hold at the moment.
It's like with when I produce my music, I grew up with sort of drum and bass and house music. But a few of my friends are drum and bass producers, and the sounds that in drum and bass, jump up drum and bass, is a lot more grimy and just more of a dirtier sort of squelchy sound, right? It's what you get in house. And then I'm like, wow, I could use that sound into tenor, right? And you know,
there's this great rap artist, you could argue he's he's a rapper anyway. He's down in France. He's called Mickey Grems, and Mickey Grems is this amazing breakdown artist, and he does wonderful things with visual arts side of things, but his music is just blew me away. Like, it's this French hip hop rap to a house track. You know what I mean? So you're getting all these amazing house synth sounds and beats and stuff like that, but it's like maybe a slightly slower BPM, and he's rapping over the top of it. And yeah, that blew me away, and I really like the stuff that he does, and he's been churning it out for the last 10 years. And then on the other side of it, he's started to pick up a little bit more of the more generic sort of hip hop stuff and sounds, but whatever. I mean, if it sells, it sells.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, Tim, I mean, it's been an absolute fucking pleasure having you on, mate.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on board and chatting today, Tim. It's been a pleasure meeting you, mate.
No, it's been very interesting. Obviously, for us, we learn stuff every time we speak to people, and people that listen as well obviously learn things as well, which is good.
Yeah.
That's the plan. That's the plan. Thanks for having me.
And all the best for the future. Hopefully you can still get some sound packs out and maybe get working with some artists, like you said, mate. It'd be good.
That's the plan. Anything to do with synthesizers, I'm the guy.
Awesome. Thanks again, Tim. It's been a blast, mate.
Tim.
Thank you very much.